so excited to be here today. I see standing room only, and I hope you're going to get a lot out of this session. So I want to talk about learning strategies from the Marketing Playbook. But I figured, before we get started, we should have a little definition on what marketing is. Okay, how does this make you feel? You're probably like, oh my gosh, I have to sit through this for 45 minutes. Of course not. But this is what we often do to our learners. Wouldn't you agree? So how about this?
They lived.
They lived.
They lived.
We lived, thanks to our Subaru.
Love. It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
Would you rather do something like this? 2 words, we lived. And it was a very, very emotional message versus, here's the definition of marketing, right? But again, what we often do when we start our training programs, when we think about our learners, well, we don't think about our learners. We think about the content. So today I want to talk a little bit about what we can learn from marketing and where there are common goals and overlaps between marketing and L&D. And really, if you think about it, it's all about getting people's attention and help them act and think in different ways. Wouldn't you agree? Yes. Would you also agree that marketing is usually doing this better than most of the time we do? I know there's some superstars in the audience for sure, but there's definitely something we can learn from marketing. And in the end, it's all about learner centricity. Marketers are really, really good putting their customers at the center of everything they're doing. So we should also put the learners at the center of everything we're doing. And I've just heard that from Brandon and Des as well, right? How important that learner experience is. So think about it. Dale Carnegie said that when we're dealing with people, we're really dealing with creatures of logic. But we're not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion. Because in the end, that is what drives us. We want to think that we're very logical, but most of the time we're not. We're very, very driven by emotions. So I want to talk about this quadrant here. It's from a 2019 Deloitte Global Capital Trends report. So it's a little bit older, but it's still a goodie. Because what it really talks about is that experience that we want to strive for. So if you look at the bottom left corner there, this is where the work-life balance sits. And we all heard about the work-life balance. That's great. But the first word in this term is work. What I'm trying to get at is work-life balance is still structured around work. The individual is kind of in there, but in the end, it's like you've got to structure your life around work. Sounds great on paper, but if you think about the individual, maybe not so much. Next came the employee engagement. Ping pong tables. Yes, that's awesome. And we have snacks in the kitchen. Well, what if you don't like ping pong? Well, you're out of luck. So again, it is structured more around the workplace versus the employee. Then we got a little bit better. We moved more toward the employee experience. Now we're talking about work processes and workplaces that are structured around the employee. Much, 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 much better. But where we really want to get to is that top quadrant, that top right corner, where experiences are employee-led and they're very, very personal. And that is that human experience. And what is the most crucial question we need to answer for our learners? Think about that for a moment as it relates to the human experience. What's the most crucial question? It actually is, am I making a difference? So if we can answer this question for our learners, we're going to make a huge difference in their lives. Because in the end, yes, sure, they want to get a paycheck. We all want to get a paycheck, so let's just put that out there. But there's more to this. Our employees want to make a difference. So let's look at Jane and Cassandra. Jane and Cassandra look very similar. They have very similar profiles. They both have the same jobs. They're the same demographics. They have 2 kids. So if you think about it, it's like, oh, sure, they probably want the same kind of learning and training experience. However, what's underneath what we just see here is their motivations. So Jane is motivated by success, paying the bills, recognition, financial well-being. But Cassandra, on the other side, she's really motivated by a purpose. She wants to solve difficult problems. So now, looking at these 2 profiles, wouldn't you agree that they're slightly different? That we probably have to approach these learners, these workers, these employees differently because they have different motivations that drive them, right? So we really got to get to a point where we can cater to these motivations at that individual level as much as possible so we can unleash that potential that every person brings to our workplace. So if we think about that human experience, we have that motivation that's different for everyone, and then we have the emotions. And where motivation and emotions interact, that is actually where behavior happens. That is where behavior change is happening. So if we think about having an impact, as we just heard in the opening speech here as well, that is what we've got to look at. We've got to look at that overlap between motivation and emotions because that is where behavior change is actually happening. So we need to customize the design and the experience and of the work and the workforce practices. Now you're saying, Bianca, this is great. We're in L&D. Like, what the hell do I have to do with work and workforce practices? I want to encourage you to think bigger. L&D has a seat at the table. Be proud of that. See where you can add more value for your learners to have more impact so they can show the impact you want them to see, right? So one great way to actually think about our employees, our learners, is something that marketers use called customer persona. We call it learner persona in L&D. It's been around for a while. Have you heard about learner personas? Yes? Couple? Okay. Some of you are using them as well? Yeah, maybe? All right. So I talked about this whole human experience and human design because it's really important that we put the learner at the center. And in order to do that, we, of course, need to understand who our learners are, right? Makes sense. So learner personas are a great way to actually get you there. They're research-based, and they're a typical representation of your learners. And what they help us do is have that human-centric design. So we think about the learner before we think about the content. And we look at the work, we look at the worker, and the work environment. So it's really, really important because we always have this conversation. Should we even call them learner? Are they employees? Are they people? I don't know, right? But if you think about it, they're more than just learners. They don't come to work to learn. I hate to tell you this, all right? They come to work. But we got to find ways to infuse the learning. And that's why it's so important to look at the work environment and the work itself. And that's why I'm encouraging you to think about that, even as part of your learning and development programs. So this is an example of what this looks like. I know there's a lot of text there, so don't worry about reading all of that. But in the end, there's different ways of how you can create learner personas once you've done your research. But the most important things for me is if you look at the top there, Jordan has a personality, right? There's Jordan Bark. I have some demographic information about him. I have a picture of him. Why am I doing this? Because I want to put a face to that name. I want to have a visual representation. So when I design my learning programs, I actually have a person in mind that I'm designing for. So this way I put the learner at the center, right? And it's fun too if you put all of this together, right? And you actually can see I put information about what his aspirations are, what his interests are. Why am I doing that? Well, because again, Jordan is a person outside of work. Jordan has interests outside of work that he brings to work. And I need to know about these because I can leverage them in my programs, right? So once you have the demographic information, you want to look at 4 buckets: see, do, hear, think, and feel. So see is, what do they see every day when they come to work? And that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily related to just training. It's just, what do they see? home office, working in an office, seeing people, seeing clients. What do they hear? Could be what they listen to, but what do they hear from their managers? What do they hear from clients? What do they hear from their coworkers? What they do is really their job description. It's always the easiest to get to because people like to talk about what they do anyway. The hardest one, what does he think and feel? And it's almost like in learning, we're not allowed to talk about that, which we'll never understand. Like, why are we not talking about emotions? Because that is what motivates our learners, but it's almost like, oh no, we can't go there, right? So identify what they see, hear, do, think, and feel, and then out of that, you can synthesize their pain points and their needs. And that is where the rubber hits the road. Because if you understand what they need, you can now design differently, right? That's the whole idea. So that all sounds wonderful, right? It's like, great, these learner personas just kind of, fall from the sky. And I'm not going to lie, it takes a little bit of time, right? But it's worth your time. It really, really is. So first, you have to gather information because, again, it's research-based, right? So we want to make sure we do the right thing, we get the right information. Personally, I love to do, interviews. There we go. Not a clicker happy day today. I like to do interviews. So interviews, one-on-one, about 30 minutes, and I like to ask about 5 to 6 questions. The first question I usually ask, tell me about yourself. Why? Because people love talking about themselves, right? Like, you learn so much about who these people are. Then I ask them, tell me about your day. What does your typical day look like? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What delights you? But also on the flip side, what are some of the challenges that you see? What else do you want to share? So 5 to 6 questions. Did you just realize that I didn't ask one training question? And that's on purpose. Because when you set up these interviews, you set the stage, you let them know that we're going to design a new training program. We want to learn more about you because we want to create this training for you. So we want to hear from you. Automatically, they will tell you all the things they like and don't like about their training, okay? Interviews are hard to get to because a lot of organizations say, well, no, you can't talk to our learners, but I know what they need. Well, do you though? So try to get past that, right? So observations are also a great way to really learn more about who your audience is. If you can't do the interviews and you can't do observations, surveys are your best friend after that. The challenge with surveys is you can't really ask follow-up questions, so it makes it a little bit more challenging, right? But if you can't get to your learners directly, if you can't take them off the floor or away from work, next best thing. Or you can do focus groups where you just bring multiple people together. That usually or often works better too than just one-on-one. And then the most important piece of all of that, no matter if you do surveys or if you have interviews or focus groups and observations, data. Right? We heard it in the opening speech as well, the impact. We have to show the impact, and we need to leverage data. So go into your LMS to pull data out. Go into your HRIS system. Use your intranet information. There is a ton of data in your intranet platform. Microsoft Teams, anything you can get your hands on. Employee surveys, right? So any data that can support the information you found. Then comes the tricky part. You have to put everything together and analyze that information and look for similarities and trends. And let me tell you, before AI, that was a lot of work. So now with AI, it's actually much, much easier to do that. And once you have that, you aggregate the information. You want to confirm it with the learner. So just like you saw the learner persona about Jordan Bark on the previous slide, take that to your learners and say, hey, do you see yourself in this? And now you're saying, Bianca, how can one person see themselves in something that we aggregated? Well, I hate to burst the bubble. As much as I love learner personas, they're not the holy grail. However, they still get us much, much closer to where we need to be, to put the learner before the content. That really is the most important message here. If you can't remember anything else from today, remember learner before content, right? Another question I started adding recently, actually, is why do you work? And now you might say, Bianca, again, people have to pay their bills. Yes, but dig a little bit deeper. Find those motivations, because once you know that, we can go back to answering the questions for them, am I making a difference? And we're going back to that human-centric design, okay? So what if you don't get buy-in? I get that all the time, right? I go in, I'm all excited, I have my learner persona cape on, I'm like, okay, we're doing this. And the stakeholders go, yeah, we don't have time, we don't have money, next. It does happen. So in this case, remember what I just said? I said sometimes it's about that messaging, learner before content. So what I do instead, I said, okay, let's get the stakeholders into a room, you're all smart people, and let's do something I like to call rapid persona creation. Everyone loves the word rapid, sounds fast, sounds good, we're still doing something, I'm not asking for a ton of time, let's do it. And in that, you can actually brainstorm and ideate what a typical persona might look like. It's not ideal, but it's kind of the next best thing. And what I like to do in a session like this, because if you want to introduce learner personas into your organization to get that buy-in, educating your stakeholders and the rest of your business is probably, if not more, important as creating the actual learner personas. So I use a little example from the design thinking world. So Doug Dietz was asked to create an MRI scanner back in the days, and you might know this story. So for General Electric, this is what the thing looked like originally. It's like, Doug, buddy, why don't you create a new MRI scanner for us? He's like, great, I love that challenge. He sits down, he creates a new MRI scanner. Ta-da, there it is, beautiful, right? Well, the challenge was with this MRI scanner, it worked perfectly, but every time they put kids in there, 80% of kids had to be sedated. It's scary. Have you ever been in an MRI scanner? It's loud, it's noisy, right? Now imagine your kid, you don't know what's going on. So what happened here? Doug created an MRI scanner that was perfectly functional, but he created it from his point of view. He didn't think about everyone who might need to go into this MRI scanner. So he went back to the drawing board, and he created this. Isn't that cool? I kind of want to go in there, right? And now we're looking at less than 8% for sedation rate for children, right? I also heard, I don't know if that's a rumor, there might be a pina colada smell in the room for the parents, but I'm not quite sure about that. So, but isn't that kind of cool? So I use that example because it gets the stakeholders every time, okay? All right. So once we have these personas, it's like, okay, great, now what do we do with this? I usually like to create 3 to 5 personas. I interview about 15 people per persona to start seeing some trends and similarities, but then what? Now, we have the hard part of the customization piece starts, and there's 3 approaches you can take. The first one is the easiest, but the hardest at the same time, a manager-driven approach. So if your managers and supervisors understand who's on their team based on these learner personas, based on the motivations and the emotions, manager can really adapt in their one-on-one conversations to what the worker, the employee in front of them needs, right? Kind of easy to implement, but really hard because you need really, really strong managers. The other 2 are a little bit easier. There's the modular approach, so we could look at, on the program level, you create a learner journey, and the learner journey goes from A to G, and someone has to take only steps A, D, and G, right? So it's very modular. You can decide, hey, you already know this. It's kind of like testing out, right? But you can do that based on the learner persona. And there's the tech-driven approach, which really is, now with the rise of AI, it's so much easier for us to actually personalize the content and push that out. It's still in its infancy. I know a lot of, companies talk about how well they do this personalization. We're getting there, but I think we still have a ways to go to make this really, really perfect. But those are like 3 different ways of how you can actually leverage the idea of learner personas into your design. And even at the asset level, really important, talk differently to them, write differently for them. If you know what's important to them, you would use different language. A busy manager, probably appreciates very short, to-the-point sentences, and someone else who, I don't know, is not as busy, although we're all so busy, they might need a different messaging, right? So think about it not just on the overall program level, but on the asset level as well. How can you talk to them differently, right? All right, so great, we have personas, we kind of know, who these people are. Now what else do I do with this information? Well, I'll tell you in a moment, but I want to show you these stats here. So there's training 1 and training 2, and I'm going to reveal in a moment what training 1 and what training 2 is. But the question these people were asked is like, the percentage of employees who rate their development program as very high. So obviously training 1 didn't do so well, right? 9% versus 91%. So what's the difference? Well, 9% was just regular training. 91% was a learner journey. And I just mentioned that, right? A learner journey. This is a strategic way of looking what our learners have to know and do differently. I always like to use the example of a sales consultant, right? Let's say the sales consultant sells some kitchens. So if you're selling kitchens, you probably start with something on the lead management side, right? Someone walks through the door, the phone's ringing, you have to answer emails, that kind of stuff, right? Then the person actually comes in, you have to present a kitchen, right? So that's kind of another step in the journey. Then after presenting the kitchen, you might have to go into pricing negotiations, right? So that's another step in there. And then all the way through the follow-up, right? So that is a learner journey. And the reason these journeys do much better compared to regular trainings is that A, they're focused on our learners, but B, they're also continuous. As the word says, right, it's a journey. It's not a one-and-done event. And that's often what we still do. So let me take you back to the marketing world again. Do you remember your last possible online purchase experience? Yeah? You have one in your mind? Okay, great. So did you know that 80% of customers consider their experience with a company to be as important as the quality of a product? 80%. It's a lot, right? So if you think about your learners, what's their experience? I have another stat for you. It's even better. 70% of online shoppers abandoned their carts in 2022. 70%. That's a lot. So the question is, how many learners abandoned your training last year? I hear some laughs and giggles, right? It's, obviously, you go into your LMS, into Learn Upon, and you're like, oh yeah, I see where people are dropping, and I see what's happening, but why? It's such an important data point to look at. And I know sometimes the training is mandatory, so they might not be able to drop, but we all know they let that e-learning module run while they go and make a coffee, right? We all know that, yes. So marketers are really good in what I like to call the marketing trifecta. They put the learner at the center, and then they look at the experience, the engagement, and the results. And usually when we see something like this, it's like you gotta pick 2, you can't have 3. No, marketing does all 3, okay? They really start with the experience. It's that customer journey. It's like, how do I get from point A to point B? When I purchase, whatever it is you purchase, what is that experience, right? How am I being engaged throughout this experience, ideally through multiple channels? Think about it. You're going to do some research. Where do you go first? Most of the time Google, maybe ChatGPT now, but you go online and you search. And then from there you get like multiple options. And then you might go to a website. And then you sign your life away the moment you enter your email address because now you're going to get spammed, right? However, marketers are really good in understanding your digital footprint, what you're doing online, and based on that, they're reacting to that. And all of a sudden, you get the right content at the right time to the right place, different channels, right? In learning, we often only think about one channel. E-learning is kind of the go-to. There might be an ILT. And I shouldn't say this out loud in an LMS conference, but everything sits in the LMS, right? But yeah, what are different channels? How can you get content to your learners? And then what marketers do really well too is they look at the results at every step of the journey. It's not like, oh, here's your smile sheet, you didn't like your training, I'm sorry. No, they look at every step of the journey to make sure they capture data, they feed that back right away. We heard about it in the beginning, shorter feedback loops, right? So this way we can actually improve the experience all the time. Marketing trifecta. So we got to move from one and done to those journeys. That's really what it comes down to. So the journey elements that you always have a journey goal. So actually what that means is it's tied to your overall business objective, your strategic goals, right? That's often something we forget in training and in learning. Remember, you have a seat at the table. That means you have to speak the business language. That means you have to tie your programs to business outcomes, right? So overall strategic goal. Then, if we think about those touch points, I kind of already mentioned like lead management and the kitchen presentation and then negotiation and the follow-up. That's a touch point. If you think about an onboarding program, it might be, the day before they join or the week before they join. It might be day one, it might be week one, right? And depending on what they're learning there's different ways, touch points, steps, right? What are the steps to get from A to Z, to do something differently, to know something? Then you have your learner goals at each of those steps, which really are just your learning and your performance objectives. What's really crucial here, though, is we have all these steps that I just talked about, right? Each of those steps has a learner goal, learning and performance objectives. Each of those learning and performance objectives have to feed back into your overall journey goal. And why is that important? Because this way, I can measure right away at every step of the journey if I will be able to meet my goal later. We call that leading indicators. Then, of course, you're like, okay, when do we get to the fun stuff? Obviously, you have the interactions in here as well. So if a learner goal is, entering leads into the CRM, the customer relationship management system, then the interaction might be, I want them to watch a video, and the channel, it could be YouTube, it could be Learn Upon, right? So there's different channels there. But these are kind of the elements you have in a journey. A journey is really, really strategic, okay? It's a strategic thinking, going from the one and done to a journey that's ongoing, okay? Okay, now what? Now we have learner journeys. What else? What else do we want to do next? Well, it sounds like we're pretty high level, right? I mean, it's somewhat strategic. You can do this for onboarding programs. You can do this for compliance trainings, like, bigger programs. Same with learner personas. You don't really want to go in and say, okay, this person asked me to do a 15-minute e-learning module. I'm going to create personas for this, right? I would not recommend that because you spend more time creating the personas than it will actually take you to design and develop that e-learning module. But, bigger programs make sense. So we have the learner personas. We know who is at the center of our training. Then we have our learner journeys, which is the strategic, kind of idea of, okay, what are all these steps that we possibly have to go through? But we want to get a little bit more tactical, right? You remember this? I hear some laughter. I think it was back in the 90s, dating myself, but it's, I'm sure if you take a moment, everyone knows like a tagline from something back in the day that they just remember. Isn't that fascinating? How about we could create this for our learners? So if they, 40 years later, are like, do you remember this training? Like, put a tagline up there. Do you have taglines for your training? Do you brand your training? Yeah, I see some nods, some of you. Think about that, right? When you create that learner journey, you can also think about, how do I actually want to market this? So I'm a big believer, as you can tell, bringing marketing techniques into my design, but I'm also a big believer in promoting what we're doing, right? And this is where learning campaigns come in. So that's, The strategic is the learner journey. Now we're getting a little bit more tactical into learning campaigns. And that's why I brought this marketing campaign for you.
Mike, what is your deal, man?
Oh, come on, man. You've been riding me all day.
Mike, you're playing like Betty White out there.
That's not what your girlfriend said.
Baby! Eat a Snickers. Better?
Better.
I'm all bet!
That hurt.
You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfies.
Really cool, right? What you might have not known about this is that this was a global campaign. And I just want to talk a little bit about this because it's fascinating. So there was the core idea of hunger changes everything. I get hangry. If it's like time for lunch, I gotta eat. The reason I bring this up is when we create these learner journeys and these learning campaigns and personalization, you're probably already thinking, Bianca, you're crazy. I don't have time as is. And now you're asking me to personalize programs. I don't have time for this. I would challenge that a little bit because I'm not asking you to recreate 20 different programs. It's more like one story that's told many different ways. And so what Snickers did is, in headquarters, they decided this core idea of hunger, that's just something we all know. And they gave each country a framework and said, hey, here's what we want to do. You localize, you customize based on what you know about your audience. Right? So as the L&D team, you can set this framework and the boundaries, and then you can identify where you can make small tweaks. Even a small tweak will make a big, big difference to your learners. They will recognize that, okay? In terms of the adaptation strategy, drive local fame globally. So you just saw Betty White in there, but each country actually had a different video they saw with an actor or an actress that was known in their geographic region. So everyone saw a different video, right? So if you were in Europe, you saw something different than in the US, than in Australia, and in Asia. It was everywhere. So the elements, TV, right, we obviously know that. There was a social media campaign, there was digital commerce, there was on-pack promotions, user-generated content. You could actually, I couldn't find it anymore, but you were able to go online, and there was this little generator thingy. It's like, who are you when you are hangry, right? So it's just really getting people excited. And putting little promotions on the package of Snickers, that's kind of cool too. So why am I talking about all of this? Well, I want to encourage you to think differently. Where can you make small changes to delight your learners? And the really cool thing is this had a massive impact. There was actually 91 plus days of media coverage, 400 million incremental unpaid media impressions that were worth $28.6 million, almost 16% in sales, with a little ad and a tagline. It's impressive, right? I mean, I doubt that we'll be able to bring in almost $29 million with our training programs, but, girl can hope and dream. But, again, I want to encourage you to think differently, to take this, to look outside of learning and development and see the commercials you like, the advertisements you like, to really bring some of these elements into your learning. And again, small pieces can already make a huge, huge difference, okay? So I already mentioned this, the journey is more strategic and the campaign is a little bit more tactical. That's where you really, can get much, much more into the details. On the previous slide, I also mentioned crowdsource content. That's something anyone does? Actually having people help you create content? I applaud you. It's a little scary, right, to let go. But I always say, let's step off our soapbox, right? Let's get other people in and have them help us. But, again, I know we're here to learn upon an LMS conference, and now I have a slide that says, think outside the LMS box. However, the assets probably would still sit on your LMS. But let me talk you through this a little bit in the last couple of minutes that we have, and then I'm also happy to take some questions if you do have them. So email and text campaign. I created a program once. The learner journey was onboarding. Okay? All familiar with that? Then I created a campaign in there. The campaign was for competitor training. The competitor training used to be a 1-hour session. Everyone sits there, nods their heads, and then they leave. Not very impactful. I worked for an event app company at the time, and our sales team specifically, I mean, they needed more. Imagine being a salesperson. Hello, how do you differ from your competitor in this feature? Well, I don't know. You can't do that, right? So we had to do something differently for these people. But then on the other hand, we have people in, administrative assistants, let's say. They like the hour session because they're like, oh, we have these 5 competitors, great, that's all I need to know. I want to have lunch now. Different personas, different needs, different motivations, right? So what I did is I created an email campaign. I used an email marketing automation tool. Most organizations have them. Talk to your marketing department or internal comms. If not, there are some free tools out there. MailerLite is one of them. You get up to 2,000 free accounts, not accounts, like users in there, or emails that you can send out. And just call it a pilot, and then you probably get some money for it. Always works. But what we did is we started with an opening session, 10, 15 minutes. We brought everyone in. And then over 6 weeks, we actually send out emails, 1 every week. And the email was different depending on the recipient. So if you're an admin assistant, you get a little less information about the competitor. If you're sales, you get much more information, links to resources, you name it. How did we do that? It's called dynamic content. We heard that in the opening session here as well. Dynamic content means the content in an email or a landing page changes based on the recipient's information. The information in this case, job role. If your job role is sales, send this email. If your job role is admin, send this email. Okay? The cool thing is we can see who opens these emails and who doesn't. If they don't open the email, we send another email, similar subject line, to kind of encourage. Didn't always work, in case you wonder, so we needed a lot of manager support there as well. So rinse and repeat over 6 weeks. In week 3, we also introduced a chatbot, and that was before AI. So it was a little bit harder to do that, but we built it into Slack. And that chatbot doesn't actually exist anymore, that company, but it was great. It allowed us to create a campaign within the campaign, and we could push out content at times, specific times as well, and learners could ask what, how, and why questions. And then at the end of 6 weeks, we brought everyone back together, and we had a little closing session. So very personalized. The content was more or less there in that 1-hour session we already had. Aside from that, I was a one-woman show at the time, in case you wonder. I had no one helping me. I just went out on the internet and got the information and the resources and whatnot. Okay, so think outside the email, the LMS box, and think about email and text messages. Another thing I constantly get here is like, but Bianca, email? Oh, we already get so many emails. Yes. However, I'm not talking about boring, Outlook emails that are just text, like nice, inspiring HTML emails with a great subject line, right? That inspire. Plus, everyone already spends their time in email. Why wouldn't I actually deliver the training right to their doorstep? So I challenge you to find a training program that you have in place already and see if you can turn it into an email course. Let's say by the end of the year, so you have enough time. All right, what else? Experiential marketing campaigns. So we were asked to create training for automotive headquarters about electric vehicles, EV. And the CEO said, I would like a 2-hour VILT, please, and a test. I'm like, that doesn't sound very good to me. So what we did instead was I said, hey, why don't we create a little expo? So we created a Believer Expo. So imagine the word believe, and then EV was actually capitalized because it was about EVs. Yeah, we branded this whole thing, right? And yeah, we had 6 booths, 2 hours still. And it was self-directed. They kind of found their way through the different booths, and there was like a movie night where they could watch like a movie about the lifestyle with EV. We had it all set up with like nice chairs and popcorn and everything. There was a big backsplash with QR codes where they could actually scan the QR codes to learn more about the history of EVs, right? And so on and so forth. We had an event app that allowed us to do a scavenger hunt, which was really cool too. So it was this whole experience. We still had to do the stupid test in the end. But anyway, the experience was still great. And we won a Gold Brandon Hall Award for it. So if you're given a request, think about it differently. Right? It doesn't have to be that initial request. You can have more impact with different things. Social media and influencer marketing campaign. I mean, I don't know how these TikTok and Instagram people are doing it, right? Like, we should all quit our jobs and be influencers because that's where the money is, right? But what can we learn in our world? Who are your advocates in your organization that already love your training, your champions? I'm a big believer, no pun intended now in the believer, but a big believer in bringing people along and help me promote my training. That word of mouth marketing is worth $1 million. Find those people, let them help you. And it's okay. It's okay to let other people in. We don't have to be on our soapbox and own everything. Open up. That's why I applauded these people that raised their hand when they said, yes, we crowdsource content. I know there's also compliance reasons there. I totally appreciate that. And there needs to be checks and balances. But open up the doors a little bit, right? Who can help you? And last, digital cause-related marketing campaigns. That's a mouthful. What does that mean? That really means, we're doing something for a good cause, right? Like organizations, sometimes when you purchase a product, they say we donate $1 to something, right? What does that have to do with us? Well, let's go back to our sales consulting selling kitchens. Wouldn't you agree that interpersonal skills are really important for a sales consultant? Right? I'd say so. So what about if we asked them to do a volunteer day? We asked them to go somewhere and volunteer at a soup kitchen or build a house or whatever it might be, and make that part of your training program. Most organizations already have volunteer days that they offer and organizations they work with. So tie that into your training as well. Because there's no better way than learning interpersonal skills than actually doing it. Wouldn't you agree? So what are you going to do differently tomorrow? I hope I encouraged you, challenged you to think differently, to do something you haven't done before tomorrow or by the end of this year. I also just want to say real quick, if you want to learn more about all the marketing things I just talked about, I have a book coming out in just under 2 weeks. Please come find me if you have more questions. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your conference.